And with that, we're going to move to our next and final panel of the day. This one is called Regenerative and Just Energy for All. And I'm just thrilled to have this incredible group of leaders from many different parts of the world to talk to us about regenerative and just energy for all. The fossil fuels account for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions contributing to climate change. So the world needs right now to transition to 100% renewable, regenerative energy immediately. However, we also need to transform the structures of power that preside over our energy system to ensure that there's a just transition. And you've been hearing us talk about it all week, and it's so incredible because it's so important because it's again, this ongoing conversation we're having about how we do things, why we do things. We cannot continue in these same systems. So to have a just transition, it needs to be democratic and a cooperative energy economy, not just moving us over to renewable energy and perpetuating the same extractive economies and not attending to our overconsumption. It needs to be much more holistic. Communities need to be included and have power over their energy systems. We don't need these top-down structures. We're seeing again and again that local energy is a solution. And as the global community navigates an energy transition, it's essential that solutions do not reproduce, we've been talking about the same injustices of the fossil fuel economy, which prioritizes economic growth over human and environmental health. We're done with that model. We don't want to see that anymore. One glaring example is that we don't want to continue the colonial practices in the form of demand for critical minerals needed for renewable energy technologies, because that is growing exponentially, not only to meet energy demands that we have now, but with the growth of AI, as we've been talking about. We can't just assume that we're going to be able to extract critical minerals for this transition, or we will destroy further lands, have more indigenous and human rights violations and violence. So yes, we need to have this renewable energy technology. They do use critical minerals, but how do we go about supplying those minerals is a giant question. How much is needed? How much is fair and just? So to avoid this injustice and harm means incorporating a much deeper analysis of not only a discussion of energy, but of extraction over consumption, particularly by wealthy countries. This has to be part of the scenario. And in light of the need for a robust analysis, I'm really excited to announce today that WECAN is releasing our new report, and it's called How Local Community Power is Central to a Just Renewable Energy Transition. And we'll put that link into the chat. This is a report that provides a climate justice framework for a just transition and empowers us, the people in our communities, to localize power. And I hope you will enjoy the report. We'd love to hear your feedback on it. We've released it out into the world, and we're really excited for people to read it and implement it. And with that, I very much look forward to this important discussion about the just energy transition. And I'm really honored to introduce these esteemed speakers so that we can learn more about this. First, we're going to be hearing from Karabo Mokgonyana, who is the Renewable Energy Campaigner from Power Shift Africa, from South Africa. Then we'll be hearing from Wahleah Johns, who is Diné. I haven't seen her in a long time, an old colleague and friend, and former director of USDOE, Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs. And she is the co-founder of Native Renewables from Turtle Island, USA. And another dear friend and colleague will be next, Natalie Isaacs, who is the founder of 1 Million Women from Australia. And then finally, we'll be hearing from Bénédicte Larissa, who is partner at ENAGRI-CI from the Ivory Coast. So this is a really special group of leaders that will guide us in this conversation. And with that, I'm really honored to give the floor to Karabo. You have the floor, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Am I audible? Just to confirm.
All is good. We see you and hear you well. Thank you.
Amazing. Greetings to everyone. It's really an honor to speak on this panel, alongside my fellow panelists. I'm really going to be quite direct in terms of my intervention. I'm going to start off by making two things clear about this specific topic. The first thing I think that consistently needs to be repeated is that a clean energy transition that leaves people behind is not just at all. And the second thing is that a transition that deepens inequality, ignores local knowledge, or reproduces colonial, extractive, and patriarchal patterns is not regenerative at all. So when we say we want regenerative and just energy for all, we're not just talking about switching to solar or wind or adopting renewable technology. We really are talking about shifting power. And I think if we miss the essence of having conversations on the power dynamics, we're really going to get this wrong. So, in every sense of the word, in terms of power, it's about who benefits, who decides, who's left behind, the control dynamics, who these systems actually serve. And those are important questions that we really need to answer. Otherwise, we may repeat a lot of the patterns that we do not want to see happening again. So I'm based in South Africa, but I work across the continent where a lot of the energy conversations are often framed around poverty or lack. Much so because many of the energy transition decisions affecting us are made elsewhere. So, in boardrooms, policy circles, and investment forums where local voices are absent or ignored. This disconnect we've seen lead to solutions that don't reflect the realities on the African continent. And too often it locks communities out of shaping the very systems that are meant to actually serve them. So the very energy systems that are meant to go into communities are not really shaped by the communities. And often there's a mismatch in terms of whether it's energy access, energy sovereignty, or even energy economic development. We are seeing a big mismatch. But luckily, that's not, Africa's full story, and I wouldn't want to just hinge on the negative sides of it. The beauty about what we're seeing on the continent is that in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, communities are building decentralized solar microgrids. We're seeing training of women in renewable energy installation and organizing that is happening at community level to stop harmful fossil development. And that's a big narrative that's being pushed. And that's exactly why our organization actually launched a campaign called WhatsApp Africa, and not as a campaign to tell the world of what's wrong, basically, but to show what is already being done and to demand the space and support to scale it. So, WhatsApp Africa is rooted in the work of real people. So, women building solar cooperatives, youth challenging fossil fuel expansion in their communities, energy practitioners developing community-led models that actually work and are defined by the communities themselves. So our role is really to connect those efforts, make them visible, and push for policies and financing that allow them to grow. So without compromise, without greenwashing, and without delay, because there's an urgency when it comes to energy access, specifically on the African continent. And this transition cannot be driven by the same top-down models, as you mentioned, that created the problems that we are seeing on the continent. So regeneration starts with local ownership, local decision making, and political will that puts people over profit. And the Global Women's Assembly's call to action says it best, and I'll just quote a part in it where it says, "We must move from a paradigm of exploitation to one of restoration." And for me, what that means is that a regenerative energy system is not only about renewables in the context of energy, it's about repair. So, repairing our relationship with land, repairing trust between governments and citizens, repairing the deep inequalities that have shaped our economies. It means shifting from global promises to local power, from climate finance in boardrooms to climate justice in villages, from carbon counting to care economies as well in the context of the energy conversation. And I'll just conclude by saying, if energy access continues to be rolled out in a way that reinforces inequality, Whether by gender, class, or geography, we're repeating old mistakes with new technology. I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and really good to hear about your work and analysis from the African continent, and also hearing about how communities are responding and building their own infrastructure. It's really exciting to hear that and how we need to go forward. So thank you so much for your comments. And with that, I'll hand the floor to Wahleah. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, Osprey. Thanks for having me and greetings, everybody. My name is Wahleah Johns. I'm Diné from Northern Arizona in the United States. I just introduced myself in my language. I have been working on energy justice topics for a very long time. I grew up near a coal mine, and that helped to frame a lot of the challenges that we see firsthand when you come from extractive community, and learned a lot about energy systems in general. And yeah, majority of the generation was exporting, water, coal to feed big coal-fired power plants um, in different regions of the United States Southwest to generate power for not for our communities, but for others like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Las Vegas and Nevada, Arizona. And so this energy system, um, quickly for me, it just really it seemed inequitable. You go over the hill from the coal mining activity, many people don't have electricity. Many people, I mean, we still haul water. So the realities in the community as far as infrastructure lacked. We still have unpaved roads. This was over 50 years of coal mining activity in our communities. And so along with a lot of other young people, started to organize to, one, protect our groundwater because they were using our groundwater to transport coal in a high desert region. And it was a one-of-kind transportation method of coal through a 300-mile pipeline that started to deplete our aquifer. So in years, I mean, I'm trying to do this really fast, but like speeding up, we did, this is where I learned a lot about our communities, a lot about our people, a lot about organizing. And there wasn't like any kind of roadmap that anyone gave us. We just felt called to do this because we wanted to make sure that we have water for our future generations. But we also started to think about, what do we want? If this is going to potentially shut down a coal mine, several coal plants, start to impact the economy of how coal was, being used as revenue for our tribe. What are we standing for? And I think this is where we talk about just transition. In 2006, we pushed for state laws in California. There's a regulatory agency there that regulates different utilities. And so this is where we went. We went straight to the utilities, and the people that manage the utilities have oversight to say, hey, this is a extractive industry that has been taking so much of our precious resources, but yet we lack many things. But this is what we are hoping to achieve in a partnership. And so we started a just transition proposal. And so that's a little bit of background. That was over 25 years ago. And I think in that time, the really trying to understand the needs of our community and people. We still didn't have electricity or running water. We started a company that focused on creating solar and battery storage and make it more accessible to people and communities. So we started a native-led organization called Native Renewables. If you haven't heard of them, they're amazing. And mostly Indigenous women engineers that lead this team. And all Indigenous installers that do installation and care for this technology that's able to provide power for people who will probably never ever see power because they live in rural communities. And really kind of isolated areas where transmission extensions will never reach. This helped to jumpstart my path in government, U.S. government. I sat in a role under the Biden administration for 4 years that led the growth of the tribal energy office in Washington, D.C. And this was probably one of my amazing, funnest job ever, where, we were able to garner over, close to 200 million to get to communities and deploy clean energy technologies throughout Indian country, Alaska, all throughout, the lower 48 states. And so what I wanted to say is that here in the US for Indian country, what I saw was tribes had been leading the pathway of building sustainable, energy efficient systems to power themselves to weather climate impacts. They started a while ago, like 20 years ago. And so this is something that, it's not just trendy in the last few years. This is something that the tribes have been building capacity for a really long time because out of necessity and to cut costs, but also to own and manage their power. And that there is sovereignty. And that's what a lot of the tribes, are trying to achieve, is that full sovereignty of owning and managing our power. So I'm gonna leave it there. There's so much I could say, but I just want to respect time and hand it back to you, Osprey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely do a round of commenting again because we'd all love to hear more. And it's just so amazing what you have done, Wahleah. And I know you also, as we mentioned in the introduction, have worked in the previous administration. You've done so much for Indian country and the work that you've done over many, many years. And it's also really inspiring to hear about all of the Indigenous women in the native renewables and just the power of all of the engineers and the local work that's being done with that. It's really, really inspiring. And with that, I would love to bring Natalie Isaacs on the floor. Nat, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Osprey. And yes, I'm speaking to you I'm about 80 kilometers south of Sydney. It's very early in the morning here. And I just want to thank you so much, Osprey, for this incredible gathering. And, you've done it again. You've brought these amazing women together. And I met you so many years ago at the WECAN 3-day retreat with many women. And I'm so grateful for you because that was a profound experience on me. You really changed my life forever, really, with that. So thank you. Yeah, I'm the founder of 1 Million Women, and we're a women's movement here in Australia, and we really focus on empowering women to live climate action and to influence others and to put more demands on politicians. We do focus a lot on reaching women across this country that aren't actually engaged on climate change yet, that don't know how to get involved, and we bring them in and we bring them along the journey. And I think it's been the last 2 years, our specific focus has been very much on the energy transition here. But more specifically, our work's been around households, about how we get our houses off gas, how we get our houses, off fossil fuels forever, and how it's, interlinked with the cost of living, and how do we get energy independence. And so in this country, like when I started 1 Million Women 16 years ago, we had 7,000 households with solar, and now we've got 4 million. And so that's just a huge leap from when I started. But we know, and in this country, that the energy story isn't equal, and we need to bring everyone along the journey. And it can't just be for those that can afford it. The economic benefits of electrification are often greatest for those struggling with high energy costs, yet low-income households will face the largest barrier to accessing these technologies. Last year we did a survey. We do this annual survey with our community, and last year it was about our households, and over 90, and we got 4,500 women take the survey, and over 90% told us that they had done some steps with energy efficiency, with electrification, but that they couldn't go further, and that they, because of the barriers of the upfront costs that they were facing, and over 65% that they would act if the government gave incentives and rebates to help our households get off gas. And, there are 10 million households in the country responsible for about 10 to 15% of all the pollution produced here. And the easiest way is to eliminate this by replacing gas appliances and power our rooftops with solar wherever possible. And I think with the work that we've been doing over these last couple of years, we want to bridge the gap between real women's stories and the lived experience and the federal political discourse on this. And so that's, our work is probably in a few parts. We we have a program where we've got about 3,000 women in that program, where we're navigating our way through household electrification on how we get our homes off gas, what rebates are out there, and how we minimize energy consumption. But we are pushing all levels of government and elevating the stories of women from all lifestyle circumstances in the process. In February this year, we took a delegation of 23 women to our federal parliament, and over 3 days we had 26 meetings with politicians across the political spectrum, because this needs to be multi-partisan support. And our delegation shared their real and authentic stories. Women who are renting, asking government incentives and encouraging their landlords to electrify, but to pass those savings on to them. Women that had asthma most of their lives, but once they got their houses off gas, one particular woman never had an asthma attack again. Women wanting to have community batteries and solar on their social housing, so that they can put more money back in their pockets and be less dependent on government pensions. And we created this policy ask, where we asked the government to support, over the next 3 years, 1 million households, to support with incentives and rebates to get our homes off gas and to electrify. And if Australia is going to reach our targets by 2040, to have all homes off gas, to be electrified, we actually need that target of 1 million homes in the next 3 years. And just recently in our election, in the lead up to the Australian election, we launched our campaign called She Votes, and it was asking women to vote for clean, affordable energy now. And we reached about 849,000 women with that message. And so I think, in closing, we are focused on, well, we are building this network of women across the country to lead their communities in the renewable energy-led transition here, but engaging with their communities. And in particular, we are focusing, strongly in the regions. Regional Australia is critical to Australia achieving our targets. But there is so much misinformation and disinformation out there. And so I think our work, we are harnessing, the real and authentic voices of women from regional communities to help counter the forces aligned against the renewables and the benefits in those communities. So I think, I think where it, I guess I just wanted to say that here we think that women are best placed to lead their communities in this renewable energy, led transition. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nat. And it's really exciting to hear about the work that you're doing. I've been following you and watched your delegation. I think it's just so critical to actually just start doing the work, which is what you're doing. You're collecting your women's community and activating, ensuring that this transition is underway. I know you were not here for our opening session, but we were talking about how women are not waiting. And I really love that you're not waiting. You are asserting yourself, intervening, and moving forward. And I think it's really critical that we all do that. So thank you for that example. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think that Bénédicte Larissa is able to join us. So what I'd like to do is go through another round with all of our amazing speakers and ask you each to respond to the following question, which is, it's so great to hear about your work. And what I'd like to find out from you, and I know a lot of the audience is also very curious about, what do you consider from the work that you're doing in this transition to renewable energy and keeping it a just transition? What is the biggest obstacle that you see? What is the obstacle? And then what do you think is the best opportunity? So both looking at what is the obstacle to this agenda moving forward, and what is the an opportunity to break through. So I would love to hear that from all of you, and if we could go back to Karabo, and we'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'll start with the opportunity as opposed to the obstacle. I'll come to the obstacle. In terms of the opportunity, and I will speak from an African context, and I think it applies across the board, regardless. I'd say that for us, the opportunity is that one, obviously, the African continent has some of the best climate when it comes to, you know, accommodating this transition. Solar, wind, we have it all. So we have the resources for it. Even the critical minerals are sitting on the continent. Um, and that for us is really great and a really great opportunity. But at the same time, there's also a really vast opportunity from a energy access, sustainable development, economic development. We see this as a broader opportunity, even green industrialization. I think the just transition is really bigger than just the conversation on the climate agenda. It's really bigger and it's broader for the African continent. And I think it would be a missed opportunity for us to really just view it as a climate response, because there is bigger aspects to the conversation on transitions, even from an aspect of developing economies and including women and youth. There's really great opportunities in that regard. I'd say the biggest obstacle, and I'll mention two, one is the funding conversation. So for us, one of the biggest things that keeps coming to the table is who's actually going to finance this transition? Where is the money going to be coming from? Because especially with the continent, there's consistent, you need to transition, you need to stop using fossil fuels. Fossil fuels exist on the continent, but who's going to finance this transition? And if we look at things like outcomes of COP29, a lot of the finance conversation is really not leaning in the right direction. So I think that's going to be a big obstacle and something that needs to be really addressed as to where this money is going to come from, where the financing is actually going to come from. And I think obviously there's innovative financing and something we need to get into further. Another obstacle, and I'm gonna again speak about it from the African context, is that the narrative around the just transition feels very imposed for the African continent. We need to own our own narrative around this. So a lot of the times, it almost feels like the concept around it is very much imposed. We need to own the conversation. We need to have a narrative on what an African just transition actually looks like. And I think that's going to be extremely crucial. And one of the things that we've seen in terms of countries not jumping on this concept is that it almost feels like the only narrative being pushed sits on the climate agenda and greenhouse gas emissions. And if you look at African countries, we don't contribute to that as much as global north countries. So it's important for us to have this narrative even go as far as energy access, energy sovereignty, sustainable development, livelihoods, economic development. And I think that there'll be greater support for the concept of energy transition. There is opposition for it because it does feel imposed, and I do feel like a sense of ownership of this conversation needs to be had for the conversation on energy transition to be progressive in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those comments. And it is so critical, your point about who's owning the narrative on the just transition. And I know, how important it is to lift up the, feminist analysis of the just transition, a climate justice interpretation of the just transition, to see, which we've been seeing more and more of, Indigenous peoples talking about an Indigenous just transition. And I couldn't agree more that we have to have communities defining what that is and not have there be a co-option of this term. And I know in a lot of the research that we've done at WECAN and in a lot of our policy briefs, we're explicitly taking time to write out a definition of just transition and recognizing that it's an evolving conversation that must involve frontline communities and those most impacted, as you have pointed out. So I think that's just a critical point. And as you said, also the need for there to be real climate finance from a climate justice lens, which is a whole battle going on at the climate negotiations, as we saw in Azerbaijan, and will continue on. That is happening in Bonn this week, and will continue on into the COP30 in Brazil, about where is the funding coming from and how do we see those funds coming as a form of reparations and funds owed that are rightly owed to those countries that have contributed the least to the crisis. So really important parts of how we're going to look at this transition to renewable energy. And I'm really excited to bring Wahleah and Natalie in this conversation, but I just realized that Bénédicte Larissa has joined us. So I want to stop the question period for a moment and let Bénédicte, have the floor to share with us her opening comments. She's a partner at ENAGRI-CI from the Ivory Coast, and we're so glad you could make it, and you have the floor. Thank you for joining us.
Merci. Thank you so much, Osprey. Thank you for all the people here. So I'm Bénédicte Larissa Dow, and I've been working for more than 13 years in solar energy. And we've been working a lot already to advance on solar energies here. And we've been working mainly on agricultural level. When I was really young, I could saw that in our countries we had a lot of foods. And we could see that it was not that logical, but the price of the food was increasing. So I wanted to know why, and for this I started to work on educating people and understanding this situation. And our mission in our organization on renewable energies is to allow agriculture to change its energy sources and to really rely on renewable energies. So we are doing workshops to show how solar energy can be used during summer for agriculture. And I am part also of a business that is helping to promote renewable energies for agriculture level, but also for the building sector. And we also work generally with different communities inside the civil society. So today we want to build two centers here in Africa. We must say that Africa is a little bit different from other continents. Here we produce less CO2 emissions, but we are also the most affected by the crisis. So this is a big injustice. And we thought that renewable energies are more than welcome here. And we are working on building two solar power plants to be able to provide solar energy at less costs and with a better quality of energy. And we want to train young people. We are thinking about 1,000 young people to manage those solar power plants. And here in Ivory Coast, we also have a program with the states to provide around 42% of energy from renewables. And we think that solar energy, mainly in rural areas, will definitely help our country to thrive and to lower even more our carbon footprint, our carbon print. So that's what I wanted to share for our country. And now I'm actually training young people in our countries so they can have a good knowledge of solar energy, and so they can also promote renewable energies. Another problem that we are great importers of energy. So we really need to develop our national installation. And the other problem is that we don't have industries that make all the solar materials. So we need to develop this. And here we have a women network in which we have different leaders, women who are really active in this. So that sits on my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bénédicte. We're very glad to have you with us. And I would like to continue. We're doing, Bénédicte, we're getting a response from the other panelists, and we'll come back to you as well. I'd like to hand the floor to Wahleah to respond to the question around the greatest barriers to the work that you're doing, but also the opportunities. Love to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, Osprey. I think the biggest barriers have traditionally been access to resources, funding, opportunities, which I think we heard from the previous dialogue in the earlier session. Indigenous peoples sort of, the numbers are like occupy or live near 80% of the world's biodiversity, and only less than 1% of foundation philanthropy is invested in Indigenous communities and nations. So that kind of speaks for, I think one puts it towards the foundations or philanthropy out there globally, that if you really care about the climate, the biodiversity, you need to invest in Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities. there's also another reason why that's such an important part is that indigenous peoples' language, culture, philosophy is intertwined with their environment and where they're from the land that they come from, and have been caretaking if you know they are able to stay on their indigenous homelands for time immemorial, and have a lot to offer in the way that we manage lands, waters, for sustain healthy climate, world. And I think that there's that connection, and it goes deeper even with our language. The preservation of our indigenous language is critical. To every 2 weeks, indigenous language is being lost, once every 2 weeks. And we're seeing that here in the United States, where our indigenous languages and our knowledge is not being as absorbed by our people. And I think that this is a really strong point. So one is the barriers of investment, but also opportunities is investing in indigenous peoples and trusting. Like, I think that there's sort of a distrust that, oh, they don't have an organization, or they don't have the, like, we can't organize ourselves. And it's just like, come on, people, like, just invest in indigenous peoples and communities. It's just something about like the partnership that it brings when there is a certain sense of trust. And I think I'm calling on foundations and philanthropy just to trust, because there could be beautiful things that come and emerge from that partnership and investment. How I've seen just transition is been from the community-led process. So I'm not as familiar with what's happening internationally. We took our just transition proposal, 25 years ago, that was built off a community that was closing a cement factory. And it was the community we went to ask for advice on how do we do this. And in the last 4 years, I spent many times with nations, tribal nations, who have coal plants and coal mines close, and took through several in-person meetings of tribal representatives from the communities affected, but also from government officials, tribal government officials, to federal government. So it's all hands on deck, need to be in the same room having a conversation, but led by in indigenous language, led by the people, to have those conversations. And I think that's the part that is so critical in, as we think about visioning. And our vision was of over 100 years out. And it was also looking 100 years back. So we can see where we've come from, and we can, plan for where we're going. And that just sets a different context when you think in those terms, as far as years ahead of planning, because it brings up conversations that are hard. So anyways, back to you, Osprey. I'm sorry if I feel like I'm taking up a lot of time.
No, this is the point of having this session, and you're not taking up too much space. Take up more space. I love what you said, and it's so powerful to think about looking 100 years to the past and looking 100 years forward. That's exactly what we need to be doing. And again, based on Indigenous principles of the 7th generation, which we have not been doing as a world community. And so that wisdom from Indigenous peoples about that generational thinking is been missing, and it's critical. So I really appreciate that. And I also wanted to spotlight something that you had said about the funding. And one of the things, that we've been really concerned about at WECAN and try to help buffer as much as we can is one, we want to see, as you mentioned, funds go directly to Indigenous peoples for the world that they're creating and the visions that they have for their own communities within their own sovereignty. And I think one of the things that I always find myself saying is, we're talking about decolonization, we're talking about structural change. And so why do we insist that Indigenous peoples who are living a different way, that we're all trying to learn from, forcing them into the capitalistic structure, into these systems of how these grants are run, and then forcing them into a colonized mind because we want to learn about being decolonized. It just doesn't make any sense. So, having these trust-based grants and an open mind to other ways of doing things is part of the transformation we're in, so we can move funds to the front lines where different ways of knowing and thinking are being that are the answer, or part of the answer certainly, can emerge without polluting them and without corrupting those systems or demanding people be other than who they are. So I really appreciate you bringing forward that point. I think it's an ongoing conversation and struggle. And with that, I'd love to bring Nat back into the conversation on how we're looking at obstacles and opportunities. Nat, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the biggest obstacles here is the highly organized and well-funded counter campaign, which is clearly connected to the powerful fossil fuel interests, and it's aimed at fueling regional and community anger and opposition to to rolling out renewables, to accelerating the transition, and especially with offshore and onshore wind. And just in my own regional community here, there's so much of that going on. There's so much conflict between the community and for this offshore wind project, which will create 1,700 jobs and 870 ongoing jobs in this little region. And so it really is trying to drown that out. And I think in terms of the work that, or the what we witness every day with 1 million women, is seeing this. I think there's this unstoppable flow-on effect when you empower a woman in her community and give give women the support that is needed so we can elevate their voices and help them influence and gather others in the community to do the same. And I think it's about that connection and that support and providing that pathway to take that on in a localized and effective way. And Osprey, I was listening to Mary Robinson's opening remarks in your first session, and she was talking about how important it is to be connected and to have community, and that really just underpins the work that we do. And when it's community based, it's personal, and then there is so much more about holding politicians accountable, and I think that there's this perfect opportunity to leave fossil fuels in the ground, to get our houses off gas here in Australia, and women are the perfect messengers to ensure that that important transition happens. So I think that's the opportunity for us. We are really building this network of regional women who have the confidence to connect with their local communities, advocating for a better, fairer and cleaner future for their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Thank you so much. Very helpful comments and helpful ideas for people to organize for themselves and bring women together in their communities to demand this change. As we know, it's not going to happen without our effort, because the powers that be will love to continue with the fossil fuel economy till they burn the planet. So, just to put it frankly, so it's really important that we continue to push forward this other agenda and organize together for the renewable energy future that we want, that is just and safe for all of our communities. Bénédicte, I would love to bring you back into the conversation as well. I had asked everyone, and love to ask you as well, in terms of the work that you're doing, the communities you're working with, the renewable sector that you're engaged with, what do you think is, one of the biggest obstacles, but also one of the biggest opportunities that you see right now? So I'll hand the floor to you and give you the final the final word here on the panel. Thank you.
Yes. What I'd like to say to conclude for this panel is a message for our government as well. We need to strengthen renewable energy. Regarding the implementation of the commitments, we need more commitment in our organization. It's a real issue with imports of the materials we need. We also need to revise the taxes policies, and it's really difficult for the population to get the materials that we need and the systems that we need for renewable energy. So we need some policies to ease these imports for the NGOs, for the communities in renewable energies. So this is the call I'd like to share. And in our organization, ENAGRI, we want to strengthen agriculture and also make sure we can bring water to communities and control our food with energy. Because seasons are changing, and it's really difficult for the populations to get water when they need it for agriculture. And it has an impact on costs and on food prices. That's really difficult for the populations. This is something that is difficult throughout Africa. So this is a call to our governments to facilitate this transition. This is something that is spoken a lot, but now we need implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bénédicte. We could not agree with you more. It is time for action. It is time for implementation. It's time to listen to women and all of their diversity and their leadership. This is why we're meeting, because we want action and we want it now. And we have the solutions, we have our plans, and we need to get on with it because we can't afford to wait any longer. So I want to thank the panelists for this really amazing session, really important to get into the actual nitty-gritty of this transition. What are we talking about? Who's doing the work? Who do we need to be listening to? And what kind of analysis do we need to have so that we really see an energy transition that is just and fair and where we center the communities who are impacted the most, while we also get our governments to act. And we're up against big forces. Let's not kid ourselves. We're up against big forces, but we can do it. And with all of your leadership, I have a lot more confidence in the next step. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to working with all of you going forward. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us on this panel. Thank you all. Look forward to continued collaborations. Thank you very much.